think I got everything going on here. Copy URL. Huh. Ah, there it is. Okay. All right, see if that link works there. I don't know quite what the latency will be on it. I don't think it'll be too bad. It's slightly higher resolution than Discord, which is only going to do like 720p. That's not enough P's. Okay. I can still hear you on Discord right now. I think you can probably hear me twice. You're probably hearing me in the stream and on here. Well, no, I'm going to need you to hear the stream because I'm going to mute myself on Discord so I can talk to you. Because I'm going to mute myself on Discord so I can talk to you. Because I muted myself on the stream, not on Discord. I did it backwards. Oh my god. The dog kept us up all last night from the stupid storm. Can you hear me okay now? Hello, hello. It says that it should be sending my audio. Yeah. It might be a lower latency thing. If this has got too much delay, then I'll just use Discord. I just wasn't sure if I could get Discord to send the audio from Riverside and not loop you back through. Because I haven't done that before, so I'm not sure. Let me know when you hear this. Okay, so it's not too bad. It's about a 5-second delay. But it's not echoing yourself back through, I don't think, right? Yeah, and just out of curiosity, let me, because maybe Discord will just work better if I do it that way. Not turn on camera. Share screen. No, that's not the one I want. It's not the one I want. There we go. See, my concern now, if you mute the stream and just look at Discord here, I don't know if it's going to play audio through. That's why I wanted to do the stream thing. You're getting audio from my voice, but let me see if I play something here. I'm guessing it's not going to play through Discord. Stream quality. Oh, no. Yeah, it won't let me do 1080p. I knew that was going to be the problem. But, oh, share stream audio. Okay, so maybe it will work if I... Oh, this is the wrong one. I wanted to not do that anyway. Just as a quick test.
So, Brian, I mentioned last week that I'd asked the Literary Studies Reddit if we had a name for the jarring transition that Butcher likes to use to go from a calm scene to a scene filled with tension and stress.
Okay, so there's a button that says share stream audio, but I'm not sure where it's getting that audio from. There's got to be. There's so many damn streamer mode. No. Voice and video. Stream attenuation. Automatically reduce stream volume when people are talking. No, that's not it. That would have been my thought. Voice filters? Options, voice and video settings. Yeah, I've already looked at that, damn it. Output device, input device. You can have a duck. Okay, hang on. Gaming, smooth video, yeah. Advanced. Yeah, I did.
After recording that episode, one of them answered with a great observation. I gave an example from chapter 6.
Oh, it's trying to do... Okay, that's... I knew there was going to be a problem here. Something tells me I can't add Chrome. Google Chrome is listed. Maybe that'll work. So let's try that. And then I'll have to remember to turn that off again. Okay, so share screen. And share screen. Says audio.
Where it says, the man with the naked sword appeared. And zealous ideal pool.
Turn off Google Chrome sound inclusion. Oh, just in the chat. Is it working now? Can you hear that?
65 answered with the following, quote, it's the use of the definite article the, which creates the effect of a stark imposition. The new thing being described imposes upon the scene without any preamble. So we skip.
All right. Interesting. Okay, why don't... Well, yeah, that makes sense. When I'm just... I'll turn on the mic in Discord to have a conversation, and I'll turn it off when I'm just doing stuff on here and talking about that. That makes the most sense. Okay, so I'm just closing the Discord stream. Okay, so here's the general outline of what this place looks like. It's broken up first into studios. I have a test studio where I was messing around with stuff, but then the idea was that within the Stormfront studio, each episode would have its own project folder with all the stuff inside of it. That broke down in the last episode because we had those weird problems and I didn't realize I was creating multiple projects. I could probably move stuff from one to the other, but I haven't messed with that yet. Anyway, this is episode 7, the one that we recorded on Monday. And this was the pre-show that we did where we talked about all the stuff. And then this was the main one that we did. And then I re-recorded the cold open to have a more definitive ending. But if you were to look at the main show and start a new edit, this is my draft edit where I've already started. But if you were to start a new edit, it would look like this. And you can see that it has taken the entire thing and turned it into a transcript for us. And all of the marks that we have made in there show up here as marker. And for example, I think there's one where I did a marker and you did a marker at the same time. It's showing up as guest in this case. But you can see those marks here along the timeline as well. So as I click on words here, it changes where the timeline is. You can see it scrolling along the timeline. And if I click on the timeline, it'll also scroll to that spot in the transcript, which is nice. It has also tried to break things up into chapters using AI. That does not work. I mean, it works okay, but, you know, we don't need this many chapters in the podcast. There's so many of them, and that is so not necessary. So what I usually do while I'm going through is delete these chapters as I go, and maybe use some of them as I go and mess around with it. Useful things to know: if you hold down Control and then use your mouse wheel, you can scroll to zoom in and out on the timeline. And if you hold down Shift and scroll, it'll scroll left and right. So that is very useful for navigating this thing. And for example, if I knew I wanted to scroll back to something, it's useful to like zoom out and then click over here or whatever, and then zoom back in to that effect. I find when I'm working this zoom thing, having it zoomed out twice from maximum zoom in is sort of the perfect zoom level. If you click and drag, you're selecting pieces. So you can click the bar at the bottom to click and drag, but you can't click the timeline itself. The other thing you can do is expand the tracks so you can see that your track and my track are separated. And this can be useful if you hear us talking over each other, because then you can select an individual portion of the track and you can, usually I think mute works better. I think if we hit delete. Yeah, delete always deletes the entire section that we're looking at, not just the track you're on. Whereas if you click the mute button, you see that just muted this portion. So if we unmute, oh, I muted the entire track. There we go. So if we listen to that,
those things can enter the mortal world. Demon doesn't mean
talk there at the moment, so I could easily just mute that. The other thing that you can do, if I don't work in this multi-track mode very often. If there were 3 or more hosts, it'd probably be more valuable. But if I noticed that that was a thing, now helpfully here, it has highlighted the fact that I have jumped in with the color. So if I wanted to make this go away, I could just highlight it, and when I click on mute, I can choose which track I want to mute. And I click myself, and boom, it's all taken care of without having to go into the multi-track thing and highlighting specially. So I usually just work in the single-track mode when I'm normally going through. Other elements here is, it's not what I use when I'm editing, but say for the sake of argument that I deleted this whole section here, and I just hit the delete button to cut that stuff out. So now if you look at what it's done here, it'll go straight from
can't look away.
Right.
Sometimes takes
to jump to the end of that cut. And sometimes at the end, when I'm sort of going through, if you go up to this little menu button over here and you like unclick show deleted parts, now it just squishes everything together, which can sometimes be more useful after editing, especially when I'm adding on sound effects or whatever, like the music and such. But most of the time I leave this show deleted on there so I can go back and undo this. So if you click on something either in the timeline or up in this thing here, it should show the restore option, and then you can restore it. So it's always non-destructive in terms of what's going on here. And if you did something and you wanted to listen back
look
to
away.
it, like, oh, that's not quite right. Control Z also just undoes whatever you did recently, like most other programs. The other thing is, because I've created a brand new edit when we came here, you can double click up here to change the name of it. So this could be test show off draft v 122. Yeah, we've done this 122 times. And then you can see there's actually my other edit is already up here, so I can click to go to a different edit, though I don't know that we'll be using much here. This is only audio, so we don't have to worry about that. The only other thing worth mentioning, this is all the AI stuff that I don't really use much of. I tried using the smart mute, but sometimes it would cut off me laughing at something you said, and that kind of made it sound a lot more hollow, like the podcast should have us interacting with each other and laughing at each other's jokes. So I don't use the smart mute anymore. Instead, when I get to a point where like both of us are talking over each other, I just mute whichever one I want to get rid of, and it usually sounds better that way. So that is the general idea, and you'll notice now that there are two different drafts down here at the bottom. And I don't know why I can't get these purple things to go away. Like, these look like things that you're supposed to, like, hey, learn about this or whatever, but they won't go. There's no X to get rid of them. So instead, they're just taking up room on this timeline where I have multiple drafts, and I have to like scroll to the left to see all the drafts. Anyway, it's dumb. So I'm going to go into the one that I've already worked on, and you can see I've already removed a ton of the chapters. So now there's only a few chapters. These are the ones that'll show up in your playlist. I put them in here because it's easy to remind myself as I'm going to make them. I try to keep them at least 7 or 8 minutes apart, just because that doesn't overwhelm too many. I might need to go in here and get rid of a couple of them, but I think it's probably okay. Anyway, so you can see that, as I mentioned before, clicking will take you anywhere, but also if you highlight on the timeline, it also highlights in the transcript and vice versa. So sometimes if I wanted to just get rid of, if this was a bad cut and I wanted to get rid of it, I could just highlight that part and hit delete, and I'd get like 95% of the way there. Every once in a while, it just gets perfect, and I don't have to mess with anything. But now, there were a couple of things I wanted to point out. Okay, so when I was editing through this, I was making notes. So if we check here, yeah, so you can hear that, I believe, in the background here, you can see you're making a noise.
There's in a book.
I mean,
you started to say something.
There's in a book.
But when it's collapsed, sometimes it doesn't show the switch over. This time it does. That's weird. When I was editing this before, this was still green.
For 8 hours in a book.
I mean,
so what I was just going to show off here is sometimes you won't see the colors properly mixed. So in this case, I'm just going to mute this right now so I don't forget. So that was the first one I wanted to show you, is that sometimes the colors don't always properly represent who's talking. You have to listen to it to be sure, or go into multi-track mode and you can definitely see. All right, the next one was the word whatever fails to show up on the timeline. Where the heck is this? I don't remember this note. Listen here to this and watch the timeline.
Harry at 42, and even at 35 or whatever.
Because you spoke it kind of a throwaway word, this looks like silence, but it's not. I was just going to point that out because sometimes you are quiet or you move away from the mic a little bit, and when you're deleting things that look like silence, just be extra careful and listen to it. The thing that I did that kind of helps is while I'm editing, I increased your volume so that on the timeline it's more distinct. You see, if we put this back down to 100, it shrinks everything, and now you literally can't see the word whatever. It's in here, but it looks silent. But if I bump this up to like 150% or whatever, now you can see there's still more there compared to my own. I don't have a problem with that because I'm too damn loud all the time. But in order to make everything sound approximately equal while I'm editing, I had to turn myself up too, so it's not like really quiet, really loud, really quiet, really loud. So that was all I was going to show you here. Is sometimes something looks like it's nothing, but it's really it. the software will be able to take that word and increase its volume when I go through the final process, to just tell it to do the sort of magic enhancement of the audio and cutting out of noise and stuff like that. I usually have been editing it without that on to hear just the natural sound when I'm editing. And what's next? Okay, then I had this here to show an example where one might leave. So here's an example of where I try to cut out the ums and the you knows, but I came to the realization that some of them sound more unnatural when you cut them out, especially if they're like in the middle of a long string. So in this case,
Oscar Wilde would set up this kind of mistaken identity.
The you know here.
This kind of mistaken identity.
If you try to cut that out, mistaken sounds really like jarring. I could probably cut out the
mistaken this kind of
this kind of. But even that, it's right up against the this, so it makes it hard to cut out. And so I'm leaving those in to maybe appease that one guy who is like, "You guys sound too much like AI." But I'm trying to take out any situations like, I think this is a perfect example right here. So let's restore this and hear this.
Toad Demon. But
so if you have a like or an that's in the middle of empty space, it's real easy to just select that and hit delete
instead of a Toad Demon. But I think
so that sounded not at all problematic once we got rid of that one. But sometimes I've been leaving in the uhs and the you knows, and that's why this whole thing of like, see all these little squiggles? That's the places where the software is determined that there's either a filler word like or whatever, or it's just empty space that can be cut. But let's try cutting this and hear what that sounds like.
Of mistaken identity thing, except it would be.
It sounds jarring, and I might still cut a little bit, but if I just cut a little bit
of mistaken identity thing, except it would be.
That's much better. So what I do is I try to find if there's any, and that's why I use this very specific zoom, the 2 away from super zoomed in, because then I can look and go, hey, this spot right here, visually I can tell that's too long of a pause. I'm just going to go here and delete about 80% of it and listen to what it sounds like.
I think something that's great here is Harry's behaving a little.
Perfect, no problem. And so it cuts out and keeps the pace of the show a little bit higher. But both of us do that. Both of us take a little bit of time here and there. And okay, I'll see this is a little bit too much space. I'll cut a little tiny bit of that out.
Harry's behaving a little oddly.
You have to be careful because sometimes it's very clear in the way that we're pronouncing specific words that it's supposed to be a dramatic pause. And so if you cut that out, it sounds really weird. Okay, so that was that one. And there were 2 things right here. So this one is sometimes worth removing a joiner thought like this. What was this?
I wasn't dizzy anymore. So that's phrase.
Like the so here isn't super necessary. It was kind of just something that you said in order to.
I wasn't dizzy anymore. That's phrased in a manner
that didn't seem to me like it needed to be there. So I took it out. So, and then another example of a transition. When let's listen to this transition between you talking and the me talking.
You're not feeling top-notch, Dresden.
No, he's not fully recovered from his concussion. But
so that is an example of a transition where one person needed to be muted.
You're not feeling top-notch, Dresden.
No, he's not fully recovered.
So I can delete my first no, or mute it rather.
You're not feeling top-notch, Dresden.
No, he's not fully recovered.
And perfect. That sounds better. We're not talking over each other. So a lot of the time, if there's a situation where I interrupted you or you interrupted me, often it's possible to delete one, like the first couple words of one person or the last couple words of the other person, and it sounds a lot better. I think I only got, then I mark whenever I've edited to a particular place so I know where I am in the editing. Oh yeah, so here's an example of one where
back from this being stage directions, and
you said you flubbed the word stage, and I was trying
back from this being stage directions,
but because you corrected yourself and you did it with more emphasis, deleting the mess up sounds really weird because you go from saying, stage directions, I mean, so there's an example of something that I'm just going to leave it in. I'm just going to let it go because even though it was flubbed, I tried editing out the first one. I think this is it.
Saved holding himself back from this being stage directions.
So if you take out the flub,
back from this being stage direction,
it sounds really weird because you're like, why are you suddenly emphasizing the word stage? And it's because you corrected yourself, and that's fine. I just realized all of these are examples of you talking, but there are plenty of examples of me doing the same thing. So, oh wow, it's really desynced now, isn't it? Because now I'm talking in Discord now. Yeah, there should be a live button on the stream that will jump you forward to whatever the most live element is. Was it buffering at all? Okay.
right? And now I can't even imagine jumping into one of those pools that got the rainwater.
Oh yeah, you were talking about the cold shower thing, and then I talked about how, oh yeah, he's a creature of habit or whatever, and he likes having things that are his, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but you basically said that in your it's just not worth reiterating it here. So that's probably a good example of one of the things I cut out there. Here's a fairly large conversation that I cut out. And I think, what were we talking about here? Oh, we were talking about whether he has changed to be less, what you call it, less rigid, more flexible, wise, like his apartment. And I think we did a good job talking about that, but then we just kept talking about it, and we kind of reiterated the same thing. And I was like, the episode's too long. We need to find something to cut. This is probably a useful thing. So that's a lot of the larger cuts have been things like that, if that makes sense. And so the last piece here, I've got like the last 8 minutes to edit. So if you wanted to watch that specific thing, that's kind of what I saved here. So I can do that now. Okay. So I got to zoom into my. And what's annoying is if you zoom all the way in with the mouse wheel and you back out once, actually that does give you, yeah, the mouse wheel zooms out by 2 clicks each, I think. Okay, anyway. One of the things I kind of do while I'm editing is, and it looks like I already went a little ahead here, I'll scroll ahead of where I'm actually listening, and if I see a big gap like this or a couple big gaps like that, I'll preemptively go and cut it out, and then I'll just start listening to see how it sounds. I've kind of already done that.
Because it's a reason that he's capable of going around corners in a way that others can't. That sort of explains his ability to do this. I really appreciate that Butcher is...
So that sounded fine. There wasn't a hidden whatever or something in that thing that made it look... Because if we listen to that...
To do this. I really...
It's just a little long. So I cut out the middle section, and it seems to... And you can also click and drag, by the way, these cuts to make it... If you're like, oh, that's a little bit too much, you can drag it down. So
I really appreciate that Butcher is not just, trying to make him impressive and cool and, oh, what a great author insert, DMPC I made. Or
the other thing to note here, you can see how the timeline right here is white. That is the app trying to tell you it thinks that this is dead space that needs to be removed. Now, I don't always agree with it, but sometimes it's right. So, maybe I'll go in and just delete a little bit on that, but that's really not that much space. I don't know why it thinks that it needs to be gone, but that's what it...
What a great author insert, DMPC I made or whatever. He's really carefully constructing, both on an in-story level and on a meta level, why Harry's the guy who's inventing the zombie tyrannosaur.
All right, so we'll just lower that a little bit. We can see that. Now, in a case where it's a transition from you to me or me to you, it makes a little more sense to have a slightly larger gap to make it feel more natural than just like me jumping in as soon as you stop talking. So I don't always get super aggressive on deleting those.
Inventing the zombie tyrannosaur.
Right. Why was that never done before? Well, the circumstances in this particular situation allow for it because there's so much necromantic energy and fear going on at this particular moment, and he has also one of the only people who have read Kendler's book, so he's the one that's able to put those two things together and make it happen.
Right.
So I don't know if it's worth keeping my response there either. Maybe I'm too hard on myself. Because you talked about, him being starborn is kind of... and then I'm like, yeah, but then I just go on to explain why the circumstances allowed it. So I'm kind of leaning towards not keeping that response in and moving on to this next piece. Yeah, that doesn't really, it's not a very good response. So I'm going to go ahead and just start by chopping that and then decide, see how it sounds.
Harry's the guy who's inventing the zombie tyrannosaur.
So
that's cut too early, so I got to back this off a little bit, and then go back here. And
meta level, why Harry's the guy who's inventing the zombie tyrannosaur.
So,
and there was a little bit of your voice there, and that's probably going to go away with the...
So, before we go...
And the so there is terrible. Why did I do that? I'm so bad at that.
Tyrannosaur.
Before we go, we got a few more things to talk about from Reddit, because we had some...
And here you can see it's got it. I just want questions for Bob to be one section. I don't need 1,000 of these stupid chapter headings, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this. Remove chapter. If you hit delete content, it deletes all the content under this chapter, which again is reversible, but it's going to remove chapter, because that just removes the chapter header. And anytime you wanted to add one, you can click on this and say, you know, you could re-record something, or you can add a chapter, or you can add an empty section, or you can add an AI voice for some reason. So the other thing is you can also add comments in here. If you click on a word or whatever, or highlight a whole section, you can add a comment in, and this acts just like a marker. So failed to submit comment. Well, I haven't seen that before. But like the main way that I've used that is that, you know, if I had to stop editing, I would put a marker in and say edited to here to make it easy to find again. But the other things that you can do, you don't really need to do anything else here. Correct allows you to change the transcript. It doesn't actually change the audio at all, but it does correct the transcript. So if it heard us say the word butcher and it thought we said beacher or something, you could change the transcript. I don't usually bother with that. I do put the transcript up on the website because it makes it more searchable. If we ever really needed to go back and say, did we ever talk about this character? We could probably just search the website with Google and it'll find the transcript part where we did or didn't talk about them. So that's kind of nice. But other than that, I don't really use any of these other things here. So let's continue.
Before we go, we got a few more things to talk about from Reddit, because we had some really great responses to this question on both Reddit and the Paranet. Aspert says, I would say...
All right, so I can already tell these are probably going to need to be reduced.
Aspert says, I would say, quote, Aspert says, quote.
Oh, see?
In the Paranet. Aspert says...
I got to go all the way to here.
On both Reddit and the Paranet. Aspert says, quote, I would say balance is a factor. Internal balance in the prose needs to be sufficiently descriptive in order to draw the reader and create a sense of urgency. However, it mustn't be so descriptive as to get bogged down in the minutia, thus losing the sense of dynamic action. External balance, for example, how the scene sits within a greater work. Fight scenes need to have a purpose beyond ain't that cool hype moments. If it's not developing the plot and or informing the character, then what's the point? Unquote. That last part, getting to what you were talking about before, character development by seeing their...
That menu pops up in the upper left corner, and I have no idea why. So maybe that won't work for you.
Choices in a fight.
And Aspert's first part is something we didn't bring up at all, but Butcher is so good at. He does a great job describing.
And that's sort of an important part to my process is anytime I make any edit, I always click back.
But Butcher is so good at. He does a great job describing fight scenes, partially because
this is going to be a little bit, this seems like that.
You see in a lot of books that have this much combat sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got another one from Great...
See that? I took out a little bit of the word absolutely there, I think.
That sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got another one from Great...
See, oddly enough, that it feels like that pause needs to be bigger.
So much combat sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got another one from Great Metro...
Yeah, because I'm basically... I'm going to just go ahead and store that. I'm using the pause to sort of change the subject, in a sense. So that pause probably needs to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we got another one from Great Metropolitan, who said, quote, a good fight scene serves the same purpose as a good song in a musical. We've reached the point where words alone are insufficient and need to demonstrate...
Oh, by the way, space pauses and starts this. That's what I'm doing with my other hand. It's basically I got my finger on the space bar and my other finger on the shift, and the shift is letting me scroll back and forth. And I try to keep ahead so that I can look for those moments, but I'm listening at the same time in case one of us flubs and retakes a word.
Character in another way. A good fight scene should have the character all over it. Why use...
And now this stopped going to following. Sometimes that happens, and I don't 100% sure why.
Each move and each combat.
Oh, you know why?
A good fight scene.
Because for some reason it thinks this entire section is me saying That's why it stopped moving up here. There's the word quote. Here's the word It's not perfect, but it is very helpful when, and I think I mentioned that to you last time, is when we quote something, we obviously change the tone of our voice to try to make it clearer that we're quoting something. And the app seems to think it's a different person talking, or it's us like going away from the microphone, like, hey, no, I'm not able to talk right now. You know, that's, I think, what it's trying to think, because sometimes it turns entire quotes into like squiggles like this is a noise that should be removed. All right, anyway.
Metropolitan, who said, quote, a good fight scene serves the same purpose as a good song in a musical. We've reached the point where words alone are insufficient and need to demonstrate character in another way. A good fight scene should have the character all over it. Why use fuego and not pyrofuego? Why use infriga more than ventus servitas and whatever? Each move and each combatant should tell you something about them. Are they disciplined, sloppy? Are they determined, casual, or frightened? Unquote.
It really is.
All right. And there was a breath there. I have found I don't need to worry about that, because when I do the AI punch up of the quality, it just works fine.
It really is great to.
One thing I did notice, and I'm going to zoom in here. You notice how it has marked this whole thing as white, like, oh, it's extra space. You could dead space. Let's listen to what happens if we get rid of all the space that it says we should get rid of there. And actually, we can, let's get all of this.
Unquote.
It really is.
It doesn't sound too bad. It was too fast, obviously. But listen to the difference.
It really.
It's harder to tell there. But sometimes when we start speaking, we draw out the first vowel as we're trying to think about what's coming next. And that is why something, 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 something. It does seem to recognize when we start with a drawn out vowel, and it does do this, where it will show itself, hey, you should cut off the front of this, which I was like, no, why would I ever do that? And then I tried it a couple of times, and I'm like, you know what? It actually is perfect. Because if you're drawing out the word a and that's that, you can cut off the first half a second of that, and it still sounds like you saying the word and. As long as it's a vowel sound at the start. It's not something that I would normally do. It's not something that I would normally do. The same thing with I there, with its. So if the vowel sound, if you see it something like this, consider, especially if it's more egregious, like you can almost not see that was recommending you cut off the front of that. But there, I haven't seen any more of those since then. But sometimes you'll see a situation where it will recommend fairly aggressive, like it'll say, oh, here's the word great, cut off the first third of it. And if that is the first third of that is white, try it out and see what it sounds like, because sometimes it actually does work fine.
Great to have magical combat in a world where there are no spell books, because the creativity.
So this is one of those times when you have a cadence.
The creativity of the wizard is such an important window into how likable of a character they are. You know, Ebenezer, I'll never hate Ebenezer.
Let's see if we can we get rid of that, you know.
They are. Ebenezer, I'll never hate Ebenezer because some of his magic is so pretty.
That's true. And I'm just going to speed you up a teeny bit here. And I really wish I could automate this. But again, when you tell the thing, hey, cut out unnecessary silences, it would aggressively cut out like the entire silence. It sounds like we're doing a TikTok video where we're doing jump cuts every 3 words.
Ebenezer, I'll never hate Ebenezer because some of his magic is so pretty. He has such a cool the body armor. He has such a cool.
So I think, I can take out where you were changing.
He has such a the body armor.
In fact, I think I can just take out.
Yeah,
I think I can take out this section here.
He just the body armor thing.
Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, because you spent this whole thing trying to figure out the example you wanted to say, so we can just jump from this sort of cut off thought directly to the actual thought.
He just the body armor thing with the corner hounds.
And every once in a while, when I do a thing, this will not immediately.
Just the body armor thing with the corner hounds is just like, yeah, man, that's incredibly badass. You're really a master.
There, you said the word "you're" twice, and I think if we just cut that
That's
out,
incredibly badass. You're really a master, and you just impress me.
I think I clipped off the end of the word.
Incredibly badass. You're really a master, and you just impress me with what you're able to do and think of. And of course, all of these ideas.
See, you almost.
All of these.
You see, I actually started. If we zoom in here, I'm not starting at the beginning of the word.
All of these ideas.
Because you stretched out the beginning of the thing, and again, this you're the one talking right now, but I do this too.
All of these.
So if we cut off just a little bit there,
all of these.
It still sounds fine. This is not really a problem. That, like I said, this is super nitpicking. But there are certain situations where "and" is a really long and annoyingly long thing, or I say it's because I'm thinking or whatever. So,
and of course, all of these.
And that's too aggressive. Back up.
And of course, all of these ideas in reality come from the author. It really does say something about Butcher's writing that he could do that. We also hit up the power.
And there was a clean in the middle of nothing that we can get rid of.
Writing that he could do that. We also hit up the power net where.
And it was now there was not quite enough pause there.
That he could do that. We also hit up the power net where Talby16 said, quote, "Something I've enjoyed about some of the fight scenes in Dresden Files is the element of surprise." The element of surprise. Harry sees something that lets him arrange the fight in a particular way or take specific actions, but we aren't told what it is until the surprise is sprung. We end up being surprised just like the enemy. Yet we can see why Harry did what he did and get the satisfaction. I think the fight in the botanical gardens in Cold Days. Harry knew the tension needed to be broken correctly to avoid a slaughter and was able to do that because he saw Catsith take out one of the bad guys. Something that's only revealed to us as the fight's going on, of course.
Hey, didn't there used to be 7 of you guys?
Such an example. Here's me talking.
Hey, didn't there used to be...
But the timeline only shows you. If you split it, you can obviously see where I'm talking and where you're not. But for some reason, it doesn't show me talking here. The other thing is for some interjections. If you're talking and I say, mm-hmm, or yeah, I will definitely leave those in if it doesn't block what you're saying, if it falls directly between your thoughts, because it sounds more like we're talking to each other, like we're having a conversation. But sometimes I'll say, mm-hmm, and it'll just be like walking right over what you're trying to say. And in those cases, it will usually show up just like this, where here's your text, and indented is the word mm-hmm. And there's a little mute button. You can mute just that, just by clicking this. So when we're talking over each other, instead of the things being, one after the other, I gotta get rid of this chapter thing, just like this one's indented because it detected that I talked over you. And so I could mute the whole thing here if I wanted to directly. And usually I'll do that if it's just like an mm-hmm or a yeah, and it blocks what you're saying.
On, of course.
Hey, didn't there used to be 7 of you guys?
Oh,
such a great
so
line.
Good.
Such a badass line.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's a perfect example of us talking over each other. It's fine, because we're both gushing about this cool moment.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, Harry doesn't...
But the way that we got out of it...
Badass line.
Mm-hmm.
Normally...
We'll just chop off your last mm-hmm. And now it should transition perfectly into me picking up where you were talking.
Hey, didn't there used to be 7 of you guys?
Oh,
such a great
so
line.
Good.
Such a badass line. Normally, Harry doesn't get to be on that side of the ambush, right? That's the unusual thing, where he gets to reveal...
I'm tempted to remove this because we're kind of just strolling off into a future book territory, but it is such a cool thing, and I think part of the fun of listening to a podcast like this is having other people bring up moments that you really enjoy. And we'll definitely talk about it again when we get there in fucking 6 years. So
information that he knows that the bad guys don't know. And it's also something that we didn't know until we read that line. Anyway, the other
yeah. I think I went too far. I think I think I can get rid of my section here. So it's perfect where we have that little moment where we're gushing here about that line, but me going on and continuing to talk about it and elaborate, no, we don't need that. That's fine. We're good. Because I had something to add to what you were saying, if I recall.
The other thing...
Oops, I didn't actually hit delete.
Oh, good.
Such a badass line. The other thing...
And now I might be able to unmute your and mute my thing instead. And sometimes the easiest way to do is just to mute and then unmute, and it comes back. There we go. And just mute my line there instead, and then end it with your...
Oh, good.
Such a badass line.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that he's talking about, Talby's talking about here, it's very common and sort of a...
perfect. So we didn't need to go into that, my little diatribe into, oh yeah, I really like that thing of the ambush. What I wanted to respond to you about was this thing. So we're going to just cut out that and have this tied directly back to the thought.
Dresdenism or a butcherism to where Harry...
Oh, it even turned this white so that I could see, hey, there's an... Oh, I got to get rid of.
Butcherism to where Harry says, like, I got an idea, but I'm going to need these things. And then the sidekick says, what do you need? And then instead of actually having that conversation, the narrator just says, so I told them. And then we never hear about what that...
There's a perfect example. Like visually, I was thinking, do I need to cut out anything here? But no, that was me providing a quote marks, without actually...
The narrator just says, so I told them. And then we never hear about what that thing was until later when Harry opens his bag and a bunch of fairies with plastic box cutters come out, right? That's the reveal, but you don't know. But you don't know about it you don't learn about it until much later. So
let's see, I can fix that probably.
You don't know about it you don't learn about it until much later. But you don't learn about it until All
right, I think
that's the reveal, but you don't learn about it until much later.
Let's see. This might be a perfect example of what you were talking about, where I can take the beginning of the word you over here and blend it into the beginning of the word you over here and see if that works.
That's the reveal, but you don't learn about it until much later.
Yeah, that worked pretty well, actually. Oops, I zoomed too far out.
That's the reveal, but you don't learn about it until much later.
Cut that here.
Reveal, but you don't learn about it until much later.
It just sounds like the word you is being shortened by my cut. I'm trying to avoid that.
That's the reveal, but you don't learn about it until much.
Now it's sounding like there's too much. There's two U's in there instead, but it does sound better.
That's the reveal, but you don't learn about it until much later. So we, just like Talbot says, we end up being just as surprised as the enemies are, because Butcher hides that reveal from us until the very end.
And it's important, of course, that these feel plausible. Fairy
Save myself some time to listen to
feel plausible. Fairies with box cutters is genius because of course.
So there's an example of an I could just click this and mute it. Boom, done. But
genius because of course you can get box cutters.
We can still hear what you said. I think it's probably good to do that.
Of course you can get fairies, but I would never think. I mean, Summer Night is one of the books that really made me fall in love with the series because nobody but Butcher has fairies with box cutters as the final battle. Kill the evil fairy queen.
Right.
And I can cut a little bit of that.
Kill the evil fairy queen.
Right. Can you think of anything else that Harry could have done to win?
So there's an example where I took a little bit too...
Could have done to win that fight against the Summer Lady at that moment. I don't think there's anybody he could bring, any ally he could call that could win that fight, but a bunch of...
That's a little too
win that fight, but a bunch of tiny fairies and she can't defend against all of them at the same time, and because they're all swiping at her with steel, she can't do magic. That's just brilliant. That's just brilliant.
And in the hands...
There's another that, and so it's recommending we cut this whole thing off. I don't think we need to do that, but let's just see what it sounds like.
Can't do magic. That's just brilliant.
And in...
there needs to be a little more gap there.
Can't do magic. That's just brilliant.
And in the hands of a lesser writer, Harry would do that one time.
I can see there's going to be a little bit of a cadence here for me to... Let's try that.
Harry would do that one time, and, Scooby-Doo never comes up again.
Might even be able to just get rid of the word and, but... let's try this.
Harry would do that one time, and, Scooby-Doo...
Yeah.
Never comes up again. One time.
I think we can get rid of that whole section. Let's see how
Harry would do that one time. Never comes up again. We never learn anything. Nobody grows from this. What happens in the Dresden Files? It
becomes doctrine.
Yeah.
So there, I started talking over you, and if I just mute your section there, it sounds more natural. Like you let me jump in.
Dresden Files?
It becomes doctrine.
Yeah, 10 books later. Exactly, yeah, exactly. It's asymmetric fairy-based warfare, the whole...
So now... And sometimes it sounds a little weird because when I mute your section, it mutes a little bit of noise coming in, but like I said, that all gets...
Files?
It becomes doctrine.
Yeah, 10 books later. Exactly, yeah, exactly. It's asymmetric fairy-based warfare, the whole book.
Yeah, and Harry becomes...
Warfare, the whole book.
Yeah, and Harry becomes the recipient of it instead, which is awesome. It's just such a great turnaround. Which is awesome. Instead, which is awesome. It's just such a great turnaround in Cold Days. That whole fight with the fairies, and then later when they're making fun of him for getting his ass kicked by fairies. Bob, I think, is the one that he can't stop laughing. Oh man. Anyway, we'll get.
Yeah.
Oh man. Anyway, we'll get there. I'm very much looking forward to it. For now, I think we're going to close it out for tonight. We've gone on for a little longer than we normally plan to. We try to keep these to about an hour.
I jumped the gun, I think, here. Move that. We need to ask the question for Bob for next time. So, let's see if I can find... there we go. Oh, it didn't... For some reason it didn't... For now... Okay, right up to here. Bingo. Okay, so I think that's right.
Looking forward to it. All right, so before...
Now, that sounded like a quick jump. I got to add a little space here, I think.
Looking forward to it. All right, so before we go, we got to talk about what our next week's question for Bob will be. Brian?
So just like we said, reusing tricks from earlier books. In Stormfront, thaumaturgical links are used to wreak havoc with characters, killing a handful of
that whole thing can go.
Characters, killing a handful of people in this book alone.
And that's a really long pause.
This book alone. So why doesn't
still stand to cut a little bit more off of it?
People in this book alone. So why doesn't anybody do this to the Merlin or some other member of the White Council, or try it on Harry again? Why don't we see thaumaturgical links exploited more in the Dresden Files? Why isn't that the main way you try to fight wizards in the first place?
All right, and there's another chapter that I need to get rid of. I kind of wish I could tell it not to do the AI.
The Dresden Files. Why isn't that the main way you try to fight wizards in the first place?
Yep, we'll see it happen in the next chapter.
Love that. Come on.
it happen in the next chapter. Sorry, 2 chapters hence, but next episode we'll be talking about the chapter where the gimpy sidekick from.
I don't know that I need to. Let me listen to the rest of this and see if I want to cut that part out.
The gimpy sidekick from Marcone comes and steals Harry's hair, and he panics. He absolutely panics. Why does that tactic not get used again? What's protecting them?
In the next episode, that's what we need to do.
Yep, we'll see it happen in the next episode.
Oh, I said next. Let's see if we can do that.
In the next episode will be. In the next episode will be.
You know what? Maybe I'll just use one of them.
In the next episode will.
Oh wow! Hang on. Oh, that's where the word "next" begins. Huh.
In the next episode, we'll be talking about the chapter where the gimpy sidekick from.
You know what? The word "gimpy" doesn't need to be in there. I couldn't remember what Harry. I think gimpy was the word that he used for that particular thug. The nickname.
The chapter where the sidekick from Marcone from.
Sidekick.
The sidekick from Marcone comes and steals Harry's hair, and he panics. He absolutely panics. Why? Panics. He absolutely panics. Why does that tactic not get used again? What's protecting them? I think we're going to have some good answers, but Bob is going to give us the correct answer, I guarantee.
I mean, he knows. He's got to know.
He's got to know. All right, with that, we are going to say good night. We hope to see you again next time.
All right, and there we are at the end. So I think I probably didn't get all of the chapter stuff right, so I would go back and go through this and figure that out. But I'm going to go ahead and mute the stream.
calm scene to a scene filled with tension and stress. Territory, a Dresden Files reread podcast. Reddit if we had a name for the jarring transition that Butcher likes to use to go from a Reddit if we had a name for the jarring transition